All right, it's time for a completely pointless top 25 in February. I think it's ridiculous to be doing top 25s at this point in the year, but everybody does them. And if you don't do them, you always ask people to do them. I get asked all the time for top 25. So I do 3 top 25s in the off season. That's it. I don't update this thing every week. It's just ridiculous. A lot of people do it. I know why they do it. It gets clicks. People like it. They like to hate on it, whatever the case. But I only do 3. I do one now after the last signing day, which was a couple of days ago. I'll update my top 25 after all the spring games have been played towards the end of April, beginning of May. And then I'll do a third and final preseason poll or ranking or whatever you want to call it a couple of weeks before the season starts, like an official preseason ranking, I guess. But look, these are mostly guesses here. There's just way too much we don't know right now. I mean, yes, signing day is wrapped up, but we've still got an entire spring practice to go through, spring games that in a lot of cases we get to watch. After the spring games are played, there's a whole nother transfer portal window that's opening up where players have a chance to leave their current team and enter the portal and get picked up by some other team. Then we've got to make it through all of summer workouts, dodging injuries, and it's unfortunate, but every single year we hear about some key player for some team that gets hurt during summer workouts. Then you've got fall camp and preseason practices, again, dodging the injuries there, suspensions that might come up. There's just way too many unknowns to really make a legitimate top 25. But like I said, people love them. Everybody does them. If you don't do them, you're always asking people to do them. So here you go. Here's my ridiculously early and pointless top 25. There it is. So this is the first top 25 ranking I've done for the 2024 season. Now, a lot of this on here is pure speculation and guesses on my part. Now, I'll remind you that just like every top 25 ranking that I do, whether it's now, a preseason right before the season starts, or in the middle of the season when I do them every week, my top 25 rankings are not projections. This is not necessarily how I think the season is going to end. So the fact that I've got Texas ranked number 1 right now in my ridiculously early top 25 does not mean that I think Texas is winning the national championship. I do my best to rank teams based off of where I think they are at right now, the day that I'm sitting down to make the top 25. I do not use my top 25 as a way to project what I think is going to happen as the season goes along. So there's a lot of things on here that are pure guesses and speculation on my part in terms of which teams are ranked higher than others. I would ask you, although I know you're not going to do it, I would ask you, focus less on where each individual team is ranked and focus more on the general area that they're ranked. And I'll give you an example here. 1, 2, and 3. I've got Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State. Okay. Of all the teams that made the playoffs last year, Texas is the only one that returns their coaching staff. Washington's coaching staff, gone. Michigan's coaching staff, gone. Alabama's coaching staff, gone. Texas returns a quarterback and a coaching staff from a team that made the playoffs last year. To me, that carries a lot of weight. Georgia at number 2. Georgia returns a quarterback and a coaching staff from a team that missed the playoffs by 3 points by losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game. They've only got 2 losses in the last 3 years. In my opinion, they've got the best roster in college football heading into 2024. But Texas did make the playoffs, and they've got a lot coming back as well. I decided to put Texas ahead of Georgia, but again, just focus on the general area these teams are ranked. I've got Ohio State at 3rd, another team that missed the playoffs last year by 1 game, losing to Michigan in the regular season finale. They return a lot. They talked a lot of their juniors that could have entered the NFL into coming back, and they have absolutely loaded up in the transfer portal for really the first time in the transfer portal area. Not that Ohio State has never brought in transfers before, but not to the degree in which they did it this year. Now, there's some sort of breaking news over the last couple of days that gives me a little bit of concern as far as the offensive coordinator position goes. They hired Bill O'Brien to come in. and be offensive coordinator and become the play caller, which is a little bit of a, I don't even really know how to describe it. Is it I don't know if it's a controversy. You've got Ryan Day there as head coach, obviously a great offensive mind. I'm of the belief that a head coach should not be a coordinator. I just think there's too many responsibilities that a head coach has today. I don't think he should also be taking on the responsibility of calling plays and being a coordinator. Ryan Day's been kind of doing that. There's been some pressure on him to sort of hand that off to someone else. There was some talk around this time last year that Brian Hartline maybe would take over some of the play calling duties. Now they bring in Bill O'Brien, but now Bill O'Brien is leaving to become head coach at Boston College or whatever it is. So I'm not sure how all that's going to work. They lost their starting quarterback from last year. Their coaching staff returns, but not their quarterback. So in terms of how I ranked the top three, those are the things that kind of played into me putting Texas 1, Georgia 2, Ohio State 3. I think every single top 25 ranking that comes out should have those three teams in the top three. The order, I could care less about. You can waste your time if you want to arguing with me that Ohio State should be 2, or Ohio State should be 1, or Georgia should be 1, and Texas should be 3. Great, that's fine. I'm not even going to disagree with you. I think any ranking that's got these three teams in any order in the top 3 is okay with me. I think these are the 3 teams that deserve to be ranked in the top 3 at this point of the offseason heading into 2024. I have seen some polls and rankings out there that have Oregon in the top 3 and Ohio State at 4. Every ranking I've seen's got Georgia and Texas 1 and 2. 3 and 4. I've seen some that have Oregon at 3. Oregon is new into the Big Ten. Ohio State and Oregon play each other. The game is in Eugene at Oregon. It's going to be a great game. You really shouldn't get worked up about where Ohio State and Oregon are ranked because they play each other fairly early in the season too, I believe. Anyway, I chose to put Ohio State at 3 because I think their roster is a little bit better top to bottom. Overall, Ryan Day has got a little bit more experience than Dan Lanning, and I'm a huge Dan Lanning fan, but he's made some boneheaded in-game decisions, in my opinion, that have cost Oregon some games, particularly the first game against Washington last year. But anyway, you're splitting hairs really with these top 4, especially these top 3. But like I always do when I put out a top 25, I do my best to at least try to explain to you why I have certain teams ranked where I do. I don't expect everybody to agree with me, but the biggest gripe I hear about top 25 polls or rankings in general is that you never hear any explanations, right? The AP comes out, 100 people are voting on that thing. You don't know why somebody put one team one place instead of another or whatever. And so I at least try to explain my thinking on why I'm putting certain teams where I do. I've got Notre Dame at 5. I think they could be one of the most improved teams in the country heading into next year. Marcus Freeman took a big step forward, in my opinion, in year 2. Now, they still lost 2 or 3 games, and obviously, the Notre Dame man wants to do better than that. But again, it was a massive improvement over year 1. They didn't have any head-scratching losses to Stanford or Marshall like they did in year 1. They nearly beat Ohio State. They then lost to Louisville. But anyway, they had a pretty good year. They've got a lot coming back. They've dipped into the transfer portal again to bring in another quarterback, Sam Hartman last year. He's gone. Now they go to Duke and get Riley Leonard. Most of their wide receivers are coming back, and I was impressed with their wide receivers last year, and that has not normally been the case for me with Notre Dame over the last decade or so. That was kind of my biggest gripe about Brian Kelly was just not able really to recruit the outside skill position players at an elite level. Yet to be seen, really, if Marcus Freeman can do that, but I did like their wide receiver core last year, Estime at running back. There's a lot to be excited for if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think, heading into 2024. Marcus Freeman, I would not be at all surprised to see Marcus Freeman take yet another step forward. The debate with Notre Dame, I think, is going to center around what does their record need to be in order to get into the playoffs, given the fact that they're not in a conference and they purposely avoid a 13th game, a conference championship game. Do they need to be 12-0 to get into a 12-team playoff? Is 11-1 good enough to get Notre Dame into a 12-team playoff? What if they go 10-2? Because you're going to see a lot of 10-2 teams get into the playoffs. Should Notre Dame be considered at 10-2? Since they're not in a conference, I think they need to be 11-1 or better in order to get into the playoffs, but I'm not on the committee. So, again, that's my top 5 right now, this way too early in 2024. I've got Ole Miss at 6. They're a team that obviously took a massive step last year, winning 11 games for, I believe, the first time in school history. I've had to sort of eat some crow on Lane Kiffin. I was kind of hard on him for a couple of years. I kept, they couldn't win any big games, that kind of thing. And even last year, if you go back and look at it, they were 10-2 in the regular season. But who'd they lose to? Alabama and Georgia, the two best teams they played. And in the case of Georgia, it wasn't even close. They got absolutely destroyed and blown out. They've got to figure out a way to compete better in the SEC against the elite teams year in and year out. But they're another team that returns a lot. They rack up in the transfer portal every single year. Losing Quinshon Judkins is not good. He was one of the best running backs in all of college football over the last 2 years. Definitely the best in the SEC. He's the first SEC running back since Herschel Walker to score 15 or more touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons. They lose him to the transfer portal. Ohio State picks him up. Again, back to the fact that Ohio State loaded up in the portal. But Lane Kiffin is a genius when it comes to the portal, and they have a pretty favorable schedule. Now, there's no such thing as easy schedules anymore in the Big Ten and the SEC because of expansion, and they've done away with divisions and realignment and all these kinds of things. But Ole Miss doesn't have to play Alabama. They do have to play Georgia, but they get Georgia at home. So, again, not an easy schedule for Ole Miss, but favorable considering some of the other schedules that are out there in the SEC. I've got Alabama a spot behind them at 7. It's hard for me to rank Alabama. It's hard for me to rank really Alabama, Michigan, and Washington. 3 of the best teams in the country last year, no doubt about it. All of them lost their coaching staffs. Alabama lost a lot to the portal, lost even more to the portal once it was announced that Nick Saban was retiring. But they still are going to be one of, if not the most talented rosters in all of college football because of the way they have recruited under Nick Saban over the last 3 to 4 years. Top 2 classes every year over the last 4 years. So that roster is just chock full of 4- and 5-star players. Mildew comes back at quarterback. You probably know by now I'm not Mildew's biggest fan. I don't think he plays the quarterback position very well. He's a hell of an athlete. He's mobile. He can run around. He can definitely hurt you with his legs. He can hit a home run with his legs, 80-yard touchdown runs and things like that. He really struggles, in my opinion, to read defenses and progress through his options downfield, particularly in the mid-range throws, 15 to 20-yard crossing routes, things like that. He throws a great deep ball, and anybody can complete a screen pass. He's got to take a massive step forward, in my opinion, when it comes to playing the position of quarterback if Alabama wants to get where they want to be under first-year head coach Kalen DeBoer. We'll see if they can do that, but they're going to have a really good defense. They're going to have some good running backs led by Justice Haynes. We'll see how the offensive line does. It was a little bit of a disappointment last year, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. The idea that Saban's leaving so Alabama will just nosedive off a cliff, I think is ridiculous. They're too talented of a team, in my opinion, to do that. And we've seen that Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. I mean, hell, he made the national championship last year in his second year at Washington with a roster way less talented than what he will have this year at Alabama. Now, it's going to be a much tougher road for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama to get to the playoffs playing an SEC schedule than it was in the Pac-12. But nevertheless, Kalen DeBoer has proven to be a good game day coach. Recruiting is a question mark. We'll see how that goes. But if you think Alabama's going to kind of fall off post Nick Saban, I think it's going to be more of a gradual decline if that's what happens. They're too talented to just nosedive. Maybe that happens at a place like Washington, who lost Kalen DeBoer, right? They don't have the sort of backfill of top 2 and 3 recruiting classes over the last 4 or 5 years to fall back on. Even Michigan, sort of to a lesser extent than Washington, lost a lot off of last year's team, new coaching staff, difficult league in the Big Ten. So it's hard to place Alabama. It's hard to place Michigan. You see, I've got them 7 and 8. I've got Washington. Where do I even have Washington? Did I even rank? I got Washington way down at 23rd. So anyway, there you go. I'm trying my best to explain this here. Missouri, I've got at 9. Now, they had a really good year last year, too. They won 10 games. They beat Ohio State in the New Year's Six game. They're another team in the SEC that when you start comparing schedules from team to team in the SEC, Missouri's got a very favorable schedule. I don't think they play Georgia or Alabama, either one. They also return a ton of talent. They have had 2 of their best recruiting classes in history over the last 2 years. Now, they're not top 5 classes, but this is Missouri we're talking about here. Drinkwitz a hot name in coaching after what he did last year. They always play tough defense. They're good along the lines of scrimmage, and they've got some elite playmakers on the outside. Oklahoma State, I've got at 10. ranking any of the Big 12 teams is almost impossible for a lot of the reasons that it's hard to rank any teams at this point in the year, but particularly in a year like this where you've got realignment, you've got teams leaving and teams coming in to almost every league. But the Big 12 in particular is losing Texas and Oklahoma, which have been the two big boys in that league forever. Not that they have won the league every single year. They haven't even played for conference championships every single year, but they have been the two sort of steady programs in the Big 12 over the course of the Big 12's existence. They're both gone. In comes Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona State. Oklahoma State, I would say, after Texas and Oklahoma, have probably been the most consistently good team in the Big 12 under Gundy, who's been there forever. Another team that returns a lot this coming year. Now, I've got massive questions about Oklahoma State defensively. But look, Oklahoma State does not have to play Oklahoma and Texas and Georgia and Bama and LSU and Tennessee and Ole Miss. They don't have to play those teams. They've got to play Texas Tech and TCU and Arizona and BYU and Central Florida and West Virginia. I mean, the Big 12, it's not a terrible league, but it just doesn't stack up to these other leagues. Somebody's got to win the Big 12. Why not Oklahoma State? Now, I think there's going to be some competition out there. I think it's sort of wide open. 4, 5, 6 teams I could see winning that thing. West Virginia was really good last year. I almost ranked them. They just missed out. If I did one of those others receiving votes thing, West Virginia would be in it. Obviously, Arizona had a really, really good year last year. Their quarterback comes back, but they've got a new coaching staff and they're in a new league. How are they going to adjust to that? Utah, Cam Rising comes back from injury. They've got the most consistent coaching staff in all of college football. How are they going to do in the Big 12? You see, I've got them ranked 11th, just behind Oklahoma State. Texas Tech could take a step forward. TCU was in the playoffs just 2 years ago. Kansas and Kansas State, I have both of them ranked. I've got a lot of Big 12 teams ranked. I'm not down on the Big 12. What I'm getting at is you can win the Big 12 without being a top 5 team. You don't need to be a top 5 team to win the Big 12. You need to be a top 5 team to win the SEC or the Big 10, right? So it becomes hard to rank some of these Big 12 teams, but I've got Oklahoma State at 10, Utah at 11. Penn State I've got at 12. Look, I toyed with putting them in the top 10. I had them as low as 16 or 17 when I was working on this ranking. They've got to start winning some of their big games. I'm tired of defending James Franklin. I love James Franklin. If I live to be 200 years old, I'll never forget what he did at Vanderbilt. That's just absolutely amazing. But you can't live off of that the rest of your life. Eventually, you've got to start winning the tough games, at least some of the time. And lately, they're just not winning any of them. They lose to Ohio State and Michigan every single year like clockwork. Now, schedules are getting rearranged this year. There's no divisions. I think those things benefit a team like Penn State. Penn State has been sort of stuck in third place in the Big Ten East year after year after year after year after year. I know they won the Big Ten in 2016, but my God, that seems like forever ago. Doing away with divisions, I think, benefits a team like Penn State. They won't have to play those teams every single year. They don't have to worry about winning a division to get into the Big Ten title game, right? It's just going to be the 2 best teams. Not that I'm predicting Penn State to do that, but their coaching staff is back, minus Mario Cristobal, who took a head coaching job. But they return a ton on both offense and defense. Drew Alara's back. I was probably the most disappointing player to me in all of college football last year was Drew Allar. Maybe that's my fault. I heaped too much expectations on him. I don't know. Sean Clifford never could win a big game at Penn State. He left. Allar came in, and I'm thinking, okay, this has got to be the guy that's going to get it done. And he didn't show up in the games that mattered. Maybe he takes a step forward in year 2. If you're a Penn State fan, you're going to have to bank on that. They're going to have one of the best running games in the country again. And again, they play really good defense. Got them at 12. Oklahoma, I've got at 13. Oklahoma's a team that, again, hard for me to rank. They're moving into the SEC. How's that going to work? How's the transition going to go? Again, schedules matter a lot in the SEC. Which teams do you play? Which teams do you avoid? But again, this top 25 ranking is not a forecast of where I think teams will finish. So it's not fair for me to rank teams based on who they play or don't play, right? I've got a big question mark about Oklahoma's defense, and I can't believe I'm saying that year 3 under Brent Venables. I thought, he would have no problem getting the defense turned around, and maybe the offense would take a significant step back. But that just hasn't been the case. They had a really good offense last year. They scored over 40 points a game. But defensively, they just crapped the bed way too many times. There are too many instances under Brent Venables where Oklahoma's defense has looked identical to the Lincoln Riley defense when he was the head coach at Oklahoma. They have got to get it together on the defensive side of the ball. If they don't, it's going to be an extremely disappointing year for Oklahoma in the SEC this year. If the defense that I saw play for Oklahoma last year shows up this year, they will not finish the season ranked playing an SEC schedule. I'm banking on year 3 under Brent Venables, the light coming on, and them taking a significant step forward there defensively. And also quarterback. Dylan Gabriel had an amazing year last year for Oklahoma. He's gone, and Jackson Arnold is taking over the starting role. Now, I get it that how a quarterback performs in a bowl game in his first start isn't necessarily a foreshadowing of how he's going to perform the following season. But with that being said, there was absolutely nothing good or positive to take away from Jackson Arnold's performance in Oklahoma's bowl game. How many turnovers? I mean, it was not good. I saw other quarterbacks make their first start in bowl games this past season and play way better. Kansas State quarterback Avery Johnson, just as one example. I got Kansas State at 19. Jackson Arnold's going to have to play at a high level, and Oklahoma's defense is going to have to take a huge step forward. I guess I'm banking on some of those things happening. I've got them at 13. I've got Clemson at 14. So similar to the Big 12, it's hard for me to rank some of these ACC teams because I'm not convinced you need to be a great team to win the ACC. Just like I'm not convinced you need to be a great team to win the Big 12. Whereas, like I mentioned, you do have to be a great team to win the SEC or the Big 10. So how do we compare? Let's say the ACC champion is 11-2. Okay. How do we compare that in terms of rankings to an SEC champion who's 11-2 or 12-1 or whatever, and same thing with the Big 10? I don't know. The ACC, in my opinion, has nosedived over the last couple of years. Some of that is Clemson's fault. The last 3 years for Clemson has been 3 of their worst years in the last decade, and last year was the worst year at Clemson in almost 15 years, losing 4 regular season games. I think everybody knows the issues I have with Dabo Swinney at this point. Refusal to use the transfer portal to address obvious weaknesses and needs that Clemson has, namely offensive line and wide receiver. It's just been unacceptable compared to what we're used to seeing at Clemson in the late 2010s when they had that amazing run where they won the SEC ACC 5 or 6 years in a row, won 2 national titles, made the playoffs every year. That team seems like a distant memory. And that program honestly seems like a distant memory. Their defense has been what's been keeping their head above water. And I'm not convinced their defense can continue to play at that kind of a level. Eventually, the offense is going to have to get it figured out. Unfortunately for Clemson, I don't know if Cade Klubnik is the one that's going to do that. He was not good last year. Clemson turned the ball over in every single game. They lost their best player in Will Shipley. Maffa comes back at running back, and I like him, but he's not going to be as good without Shipley as he was with him, in my opinion. I've got some serious concerns about Clemson, but when you look at the ACC, somebody's got to win it. Who do you think's winning the ACC? And again, I'm not necessarily predicting that that's going to be Clemson, but I've got them ranked 14, the highest ACC team on this list. Who in the ACC would you rank higher than them? I've got Miami at 18. I've got NC State at 17. I've got Florida State all the way down at 20. I've got Virginia Tech at 24. I think they've got as good of a shot to win the ACC as anybody else in the ACC. I think they're going to have a good year, Virginia Tech. I almost had them in the top 20, settled on 24 with them. But again, Clemson at 14. I've got LSU at 15. Another team that if they don't figure it out defensively, they're going to find themselves nowhere near this top 25 list by season's end. They lose Jaden Daniels, which is the sole reason they won the games they did last year. Their defense was the worst probably that I've seen in my lifetime at LSU. It was Lincoln Riley level bad. That's how bad it was. They have got to get better defensively immediately, particularly in the back end, which is weird to say because LSU has been like DBU basically for the last 10 or 15 years. Last year, they couldn't stop a pass to save their life. It was honestly sad to see, and it made you feel bad for that offense and Jaden Daniels, who was putting up video game numbers every single week just so they could win games 50-45. The defense was pitiful. Brian Kelly's got to get it together, but I've got them at 15. They've still got one of the most talented teams in the country. Daniels is gone. Nussmeier takes over at QB. He's had some success as a starter in the past. We'll see if that can continue. I've got Arizona at 16, one of the most surprising teams last year. Them, West Virginia, Ole Miss, Missouri. But they lose the coaching staff. Now, they did manage to hang on to that quarterback, Fatita, or whatever his name is, and I think he's a Heisman candidate. Again, transitioning from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, a new conference. Every road game you play is going to be unfamiliar environments that most of those players have never played in. How is Arizona going to handle the transition from the Pac-12 to the Big 12? I don't know. Can they win 10 games again? Maybe. The Pac-12 is pretty wide open, or the Big 12 is pretty wide open. It's hard for me to pinpoint who the favorite is in the Big 12. Is it Utah? It could be. I like Oklahoma State. I was high on Texas Tech last year. They disappointed. Maybe I was off by a year, and this is the year Texas Tech makes the leap. West Virginia, do they continue their move forward? It's hard to know. But with a quarterback like that, I think they'll win a lot of games. In the Big 12, I've got them at 16. I've got NC State at 17. Look, I went back and forth on having NC State unranked all the way up to 17th and everywhere in between. I really don't know why I settled on 17, especially with having Miami right behind them at 18. I'll be honest, if Miami and NC State played tomorrow, I'd probably pick Miami to win. But again, this isn't a projection ranking. This isn't a power rating where, I think one would beat two. I think two would beat three. I think three would beat four. That's a power rating. That's what Positive Pate does. I don't do that. I don't do power ratings. I do rankings where I just feel like teams deserve to be ranked. But I've got NC State at 17, Miami at 18. Mario Cristobal. Mario Cristobal. I think I said Mario Cristobal. I got something wrong earlier. I just realized it. I said Mario Cristobal moved from defensive coordinator at Penn State down to head coach at Duke. That obviously is wrong. It's not Mario Cristobal. It's Manny Diaz. There's probably already been 100 comments left on this video if you're watching it telling me I got that wrong. Yes, I got that wrong. Manny Diaz used to coach at Miami, became the defensive coordinator at Penn State. Now he's the head coach at Duke, which I talked about earlier when I talked about Penn State. Mario Cristobal, who used to be the coach at Oregon, is now the head coach at Miami. So now that I've done confused all of that, he's got to do a better job coaching on Saturdays. No question about it. They just finished with a top 5 recruiting class in the country. That doesn't surprise anybody at all. When he was hired down there at Miami, people said two things. Number one, the talent level on Miami's roster is about to go through the roof. That is proven to be true. Number two, he's got to prove he knows how to coach football on Saturdays. We haven't seen that yet. Boneheaded decisions last year, the Georgia Tech game, obviously at the forefront of that conversation. He's got to start winning some of these games against the Georgia Techs, the Dukes, the whatever, the middle of the pack ACC teams. He's got to get Miami to the point where you don't have to worry about those games. And then you look at your schedule and you go, okay, who are the best 2 teams we play? How can we beat them? How can we beat Florida State? How can we beat Clemson? How can we beat NC State? They've got to get beyond the point where they're worried about the Dukes and the Boston Colleges and the Pitts of the world and the Georgia Tech. They got to do that. Kansas State at 19. I think Kansas State is a team that could find themselves in the Big 12 title game this year. I absolutely loved the way their quarterback looked in the bowl game. Avery Johnson, I believe, is his name. They've got one of the, I think, most underrated coaching staffs in in the entire country there at Kansas State. And I think they could make some noise in 2024. Florida State at 20. Look, you can't have it both ways. You can't tell me none of our players played in the bowl game. That was all next year's team. And then tell me next year's team is going to be good. You got beat by 60 fucking points in a bowl game. I had a guy call into the call-in show the other day, a Florida State fan, and I asked him, I said, okay, transfer portal. I know Florida State likes to rely on that. You're bringing in DJ Uiagalelei to play quarterback to replace Jordan Travis. Is he as good or better than Jordan Travis? Florida State fans said, no, he's not as good as better than Jordan Travis. Okay, good. That's obvious, and I'm glad the Florida State fans willing to admit that. Then I said, who's replacing Keon Coleman and Wilson or whatever his name is? Guy tells me they got 2 Keon Colemans on the team right now. I'm not buying it. I said, are those the guys that played in the bowl game? He said, yeah. I said, okay, that's all I needed to hear. I don't see any way imaginable Florida State is anywhere close to as good as they were last year. And last year, Florida State was really good. I mean, we saw they were a borderline playoff team. Of course, the argument can be made they should have been in the playoffs. That horse has been beaten to a pulp. There's no sense in getting back into it. I think Florida State should have been in the playoffs. Of course, the problem is I also think Alabama should have been in. I also think Texas should have been in. I also think Michigan should have been in. I also think Washington should have been. That's the problem. There's 5 teams that pretty much everybody thinks should have been in, and we could only put 4 in. Florida State, fairly or unfairly, was the one that got left out, but they were a really good team last year. I don't see it happening again in 2024. I like Norvell. He's done a good job down there. He's brought Florida State back to the forefront of college football after circling the drain for a few years with Willie Taggart. I don't think this is the year for Florida State. I would be shocked if they were to make a 12-team playoff this year. Tennessee at 21, another difficult team for me to rank. There's arguments you can make to have Tennessee within the top 15. And I'm not going to disagree. Like I said, you can have teams ranked wherever you want. I'm not going to argue with you about preseason polls made 7 months before the season starts, 6 months before the season starts. But you can definitely make a legitimate argument that Tennessee should be ranked inside the 15. And like a few other teams, I went back and forth with Tennessee anywhere from 13 or 14 all the way down to 22 or 23, landed on 21. I've still got questions about Nico, all jokes aside. We've never seen him play outside of the bowl game. And I wasn't impressed with him in the bowl game. And the Tennessee fans can type till their fingers fall off about the fact that he ran for a touchdown or two. He couldn't complete a pass. Does Iowa have a good defense? Yeah, of course they do. There's plenty of good defenses in the SEC too. Okay? There just is. I still have questions about Tennessee defensively. Are they as bad as they were 2 years ago? No, they got a little bit better last year. But I don't think they're where they need to be defensively. I just don't. Now, if Nico can perform at a Hendon Hooker type level, I think they'll be a top 10 team and a potential playoff team. I like their wide receivers. They've got one of the best running games in the SEC every single year. If the defense can get a little bit better and Nico can perform at a Hendon Hooker type level, okay, so before the Tennessee fans get all mad at me and all, again, this is not a projection of where I think Tennessee will finish, okay? I'm telling you right now what I think Tennessee needs to do if they want to make the playoffs. Well, the obvious thing is they got to go 10-2 or better, okay? That's the obvious thing. And we could talk about schedules with Tennessee later, but they still play Georgia in Athens. They do get Alabama, but they get them at home. They got to travel to Oklahoma, I believe, so it's no guarantee Tennessee's going 10-2, but if Nico can play at a Hendon Hooker type level from 2 seasons ago, and the defense can continue to improve, I do think it's possible Tennessee finds themselves fighting for a spot in the 12-team playoff at the end of the season. So to all the Tennessee people that say I just hate Tennessee, there you go. I do. If I were to make a list of 20 teams that could potentially make the playoffs next year, Tennessee would be on that list. The fact that I have them ranked 21st doesn't have anything to do with who I think's making the playoffs, okay? Again, this is not a projection. Iowa at 22. They got to learn how to score some points. I mean, I don't, you're stating the obvious here. One of the best defenses in the country every single year. Now, we're going to find out how much of that, Iowa having the best defense statistically in the country, one of the best defenses in the country statistically the last couple of years, how much of that is because they play 7 Big Ten West teams a year? This is the absolute worst division in all. The Big Ten West is just a dumpster fire of teams with terrible offenses. You can't name a good quarterback in the Big Ten West. So how much of Iowa's sort of defensive supremacy is because they played all those Big Ten West teams? Because, of course, this year there is no Big Ten East and West. So Iowa's going to play some of the new teams from the West Coast. They're going to play some of the Big Ten East teams. They're going to play some of the old Big Ten West teams. We'll see. But no matter how good that defense plays or performs in 2024, if the offense doesn't take significant steps forward, they're going to be the same place they always are at the end of the year the last couple of years, ranked somewhere between 20 and 25 with 2 or 3 losses and no trip to the Big Ten title game and no playoffs. I mean, that's just what it is. Washington at 23, got no idea. Look, I am ranking Washington 23 purely out of respect. Now, you might say, well, that's disrespectful. They made the playoffs, and now you got them at 23. Based on what I know about Washington at this point, right now, today, they're not a top 25 team. In my opinion, they're not a top 25 team. So this is showing respect that I've got them at 23. I just didn't have it in me to unrank a team that made the playoffs the previous year. Didn't have it in me. I like the coach they brought in, but they just lost. I mean, they lost Penix. They lost 2 NFL wide receivers. They couldn't run the ball to save their life last year. Their defense was kind of up and down. I mean, I don't think they have a great defense. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't Southern Cal or LSU level bad, but it wasn't top 5 either. I've got serious questions about Washington and their ability to transition into the Big Ten, at least immediately. Over time, I think they can be one of the best 4, 5, 6 programs in the Big Ten. But I think it's going to be potentially a disappointing year for Washington in 2024. Virginia Tech at 24. I'm out on a limb here. I get it. You probably won't find Virginia Tech ranked in any other top 25, but I'm high on Virginia Tech. They finished the year strong last year. They were 6-3 in their last 9 games. They get almost every single key contributor on that team, offensively and defensively, back for 2024. And just a reminder, they're in the ACC. There's not a bunch of top 10 teams they got to play, okay? I think Virginia Tech could have the best year they've had in a long, long time. I've got them at 24, and I've got Kansas at 25, and this is a nod to their coaching staff, much like Kansas State at 19. What Kansas has got to do is figure out how to play the second half of the season. The last couple of years, Kansas has started out hot. Now, whether that's a product of the way the schedule is set up, maybe it's been backloaded with the tougher games, but the last couple of years, Kansas starts out sort of surprising everybody. They're winning, and you're like, oh my God, look at that. Kansas won a game. They're 3-0, 4-0, 5-1, 6-2, that kind of thing. And in the last half of the season, it kind of just nosedives. They got to figure out how to finish out a season. Again, Texas and Oklahoma gone from the Big 12. In come Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah. We'll see how all that kind of unfolds over the course of the season, but I've got Kansas at 25. SMU is a team I considered putting into the top 25. They'd be probably just right outside my top 25. Louisville, just outside my top 25. And a handful of other teams I considered as well. But there you go. That's my way too early, pointless, ridiculous top 25 post-signing day edition. Again, I will update this a couple of times over the course of the offseason. I'll do another one after all the spring games have been played, and then I'll do a final preseason poll 2, 3, 4 weeks, a month, whatever, before the season starts, sort of an official preseason poll, maybe around the first week of August. But I do appreciate you watching. Hit the thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Let me know where I'm wrong. Have a good morning.